Yeah, so because last time we were talking about the Epstein case, the corruption of the US government, and toward the end of it, you were talking, you brought up the Bo Xilai case, and I cut you
Yeah.
unintentionally. But anyway, so I do want to know what the British media reported about this case. It is an old case, but I am still curious. There must be a lot of interest in Britain. It involves a British businessman, Neil Haywood, right? So how did the British media report about this matter?
Right. The British media avoided very much getting into the details of the case at
Hmm.
all. The way they reported it, and I remember this very, very well, is as a power struggle
Okay.
within China.
Mhm.
Supposedly, Bo Xilai was leading a Maoist faction against Xi Jinping
Okay.
and was trying to win out against Xi Jinping. So there were references to the fact that Bo Xilai had a connection with this British businessman, as he rightly said, and connections with Britain, and that his wife, who comes across as a rather sinister
Hmm.
individual for some of the reporting, that she had even more extensive connections with
Hmm.
people in Britain and did seem to be involved in quite a lot of corruption. But they sort of downplayed that. They were
Okay.
basically implying that this is how top Chinese leaders usually behave, that there's
Mhm.
nothing unusual in any of the
Mhm.
extraordinary things that Bo Xilai and his wife were up to. And that, in fact, what had happened was that they'd fallen foul of the rise of Xi Jinping, who was on his way to become China's paramount leader.
Mhm.
Now, of course, I was not as involved in Chinese affairs at that time as I am
Mhm.
today, because we're talking about an event that took place, well, quite a long time ago now. But I remember reading all of this. And I said to myself, this is absolute nonsense. I could tell immediately that the British commentary was completely wrong. And it was clear to me that this was a man, a very ambitious man,
Mhm.
who had gone completely off the rails, and maybe he was led into it by his wife, who knows, but he'd gone completely off the rails and had become deeply corrupt and implicated in terrible things, including murder.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that inevitably, and when the Chinese authorities found out about it, he would be called to account for what he did.
Mm.
And that, of course, is exactly what happened. So it seemed to me there is a classic example of the way the Western media persistently, and the British media in this particular case, persistently misreads events in other countries to fit its own theories
Mhm.
about the way those countries are run. The Western aspect of the scandal, the fact that Bo Xilai and his wife were heavily implicated in corrupt practices in Britain. And can I just say, if you know anything about London and the city of London and how it functions, you would know that it's completely unsurprising that, there was this British angle to it. Um, anyway, that was, yeah, but you were asking me about the media. That
Mhm.
was heavily downplayed.
Well, I think there's some truth to it. It is a power struggle. But what they missed, I think the British media missed, is it's not as much as Bo Xilai and Xi Jinping are on equal fighting terms that they were trying to get to top. At that time, I think Xi Jinping already pretty much secured his position. People don't people don't understand how the Chinese Communist Party of China works. You do need
Yeah,
votes. These people are actually voted within the party, and
yeah,
which have yeah
yeah.
close to 100 million members. So, which is a lot of members, and you
Mm,
go through different stages, and that's how you get
mm,
there. It's not like it's now the reason people think that they are on equal terms is they both are regarded as we call them princelings. Okay, they come from
yeah, yeah,
established families, but I think that Bo Xilai had a very bad reputation. On the one hand, he was the mayor of Dalian and later Chongqing, so he achieved something in those cities. Some people in those
yeah,
cities do like him because he supposedly cracked down on corruption. but he himself is extremely corrupted, and he also very coercive and sometimes using very, very questionable means to do
Yeah.
things like killing people, I mean, murder people. There has been scandals of that, that by his direction, people got murdered for whatever reason, people who defined him or disagree with him, stuff like that. So he's like a horrible figure in that sense. And of course, the party wouldn't want somebody like that to
No.
lead the country. I think
Yeah.
his main problem is himself, that he just has so many questionable dealings in the past. And of course, corruption is a big part of it. And Neil Haywood is involved in that because he was helping the family. He's almost like the family handler
Yeah.
for different countries, and in particular Britain, right?
Yeah.
Dealing with the British business and the political leaders, kind of the figure, right? And then,
Well, absolutely. I mean, can I make a few quick comments about this because I've seen this happen. I was recently in Georgia, in Tbilisi, and I saw how it worked there, and of course I know Moscow and what happened there too. So let's use Moscow as an example because I think there are similarities and some parallels. Now, for the first 10 years of the 21st century, well, in fact, for the 90s and in the early 2000s and in the 2000s, Moscow politics was dominated by a man called Yuri Lushkov.
mhm,
Yuri Lushkov was the mayor of Moscow. And at one time, rather like Bo Xilai, he was
mhm,
popular because he did seem to be getting things done. I mean, buildings were getting cleaned and the rubbish was getting collected and things of that kind. But what he was actually doing, and I think this is exactly what Bo Xilai was doing, is that he was concentrating on the corruption. He was bringing the corruption under his personal control.
mhm,
So that can lead to an impression that things are getting better when in fact in reality what you have is a boss type person who is taking sort of control. I saw that in Moscow. I saw that, by the way, Tbilisi, the city of Tbilisi, which is the capital of Georgia, has been through exactly the same process. Now, in the case of Lushkov, he was eventually removed because his corruption had become so grotesque that eventually uh, um, they removed him. They didn't prosecute him because this is Russia, and there was problems, and he still had a lot of power. And his wife, who played a similar role to Bo Xilai's wife, came to London. Notice the London connection. And she's still here and she controls billions of dollars. And she's a major figure, by the way, in organizing and spreading the anti Russian propaganda that you get in Britain. So, so the Russians failed to clean up in the same way. But I think that this is basically what you're describing with Bo
mhm.
Xilai.
Yeah,
He was effective,
yeah,
but effective first and foremost in concentrating the corruption in himself. And that can, as I said, seem like it's achieving something. Now, the key thing to understand about, we were talking about the Communist Party of China
mhm,
um, in a few programs, is I think this is completely impossible to sustain for any length of time within the Communist Party structures. Now, a friend of mine who is Russian
mhm,
was for a time based in Shanghai. In fact, he was the director of one of the Russian state banks in Shanghai. Now, he, I should say, is a man of staunch communist convictions, not incompatible to be a banker and that in Russia. But anyway, he was a man of staunch communist convictions. He was a high flyer in the Komsomol, the Communist Youth League.
mhm,
You told me something very interesting comparing the Communist Party in China and the Communist Party in Russia, which I should have mentioned in our previous program, which is that relative to the size of the population in China,
mhm,
the Communist Party of China is very small.
mhm,
I mean, it may seem like it's very big, 90 million people or whatever, but you're talking about a country of 1.4 billion
Mhm.
people.
Yeah.
Whereas in Russia, starting from the time of Nikita Khrushchev in the 50s, there had been a policy to expand the party membership
Mhm.
as much as possible through as big a proportion of the population as possible. And he said to me that this fostered corruption and
Mhm.
diluted the party because far too many people who joined the party were not really committed to it.
Mhm.
And he said the Chinese in China had taken a completely different approach. So that the people that he was coming up against, people who were members of the Communist Party, they were relatively few
Mhm.
and they were committed to the party and to its membership and basically to its program.
Yeah.
So he actually, and this is, I think, we didn't actually talk about Bo Xilai, but he
Mhm.
told me that he didn't think that the kind of boss politics that established themselves in Russia would
Mhm.
be possible in China in the same way for that reason, because the party structures were under much tighter
Mhm.
control and much more disciplined, and that the party in China retained its inner coherence. Now, this is from someone, as I said, who has deep communist convictions. I mean, he was a genuine, sincere communist, both in Soviet times and still today. We're still friends. So you get the difference. So I don't think he could have survived. I don't think there's any possibility that he would have become paramount leader of China. That was inconceivable, actually. The extraordinary thing was that he was able to establish himself where he was at all, and rise to the level of the Politburo, though not, I believe, to the Standing Committee.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I again, and I'm not talking about this Russian friend.
Mhm.
He said that in the 1980s, at the time when China opened up and there were the big reforms, because there was a lot of inflation at that time as a result of the adjustments, there had been some temptation for corruption,
Mhm.
which had affected some of the cadres. But he also said to me, and he was the man who taught me about Chen Yun, of whom he was a great admirer,
Uh-huh.
by the way. He is a great admirer.
Yeah.
That Chen Yun at that time was very, very opposed to
Mhm.
corruption.
Yeah.
And that managed to bring the whole situation to a great extent under control. And that Chen Yun lived a very austere lifestyle, which was an example to the rest of the Chinese leaders. And he said to me, this man, who is a friend of mine, said to me that he felt that Xi Jinping was to a great extent a disciple of Chen Yun. You might be completely wrong about the last point, but anyway, that was what he said. That he was very influenced by the example of Chen Yun, and that just as Chen Yun brought corruption under control, then basically purifying the party, that Xi Jinping would be continuing in that tradition. Now, we had that conversation, I should say, in 2017 when I
Mhm.
was in China. So not very long after
Mhm.
um, Xi Jinping became
Mhm.
China's president.
Well, I think Bo Xilai in a way almost like a mafia leader, a little bit
Yeah,
of that kind of style, right? So that
yeah,
that can never work in the
no,
Communist Party
no,
of China. So,
no,
but I don't
no.
think the British media realize that. And it's
The British media absolutely would not realize that.
and
They would see Bo Xilai as typical, not as the exception. Whereas to my Russian friend,
Mhm.
with his standards of comparison being the Soviet Union, where
Mhm.
at the end the party was very affected by corruption.
Yeah.
He said to me that in China, I mean, this is not the way it works.
Mhm.
Corruption in the party at that level is just impossible
Yeah.
because the people are too carefully selected for that to happen.
Yeah, there are corruptions in different like local
Yeah.
levels in China. They are, from time to time you hear that kind of report. But at the very highest level, like I think a part of the reason Xi Jinping was elected is because within the party is because he himself is very clean and he really wants to do crackdown on corruptions. In fact, I think there is a book. The name is the Red Roulette. The guy who wrote the book, he himself is part of the corruption. He was very corrupted at the pretty high level in China. But then once Xi Jinping got into power, he cracked down on everything. And so this guy ran it again. He lives in Britain. So he wrote this book, The Red Roulette, and it's all about how bad Xi Jinping is, which I still don't quite see any concrete actions that Xi Jinping did that would discredit him. But one thing he mentioned I find interesting is that he said he met Xi Jinping one time in a dinner. And he said Xi Jinping and his wife, they were very cold towards him and his wife, which we know they are the corrupted people. And he just said, they're not, it seems like we are not his type of people. Yes. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. I mean, can I just say something? I mean, I like to talk about London now because, of course, London is the world center of corruption. I mean, this isn't something people understand about London, but it is not surprising that Bo Xilai and his wife had British connections.
Mhm.
And it is not surprising that Yuri Lushkov and his wife had British connections as well, and that she's based here in London, because the whole system that around which the City of London was constructed was precisely to do this. I mean, if you have secret, if you want to keep your money secret, if you wanted to launder it in some way, if you want to evade your taxes
Yeah.
and siphon your money and hide it in all kinds of places, London is the place you come to. This is that they are very good at this,
Mhm.
and they do the odd thing. What is paradoxical about it is that it's done openly,
Mhm.
and within British law, it is done legally. I mean, there are lawyers and there
Mhm.
are accountants and there are fund managers who are there to help you do precisely those things.
Yeah.
I know some of these people, just to say. So, of course, if you are Bo Xilai
Mhm.
and you want to, you operate like a kind of gang boss, a mafia boss, and you're making money, how are you going to conceal it? You're going to conceal it by contacting people in London.
Yeah.
Now, and of course, in China, I'm going to make a guess that with Hong Kong and with the
Mhm.
British influence there,
Mhm.
there's probably, or at least there was at that time, still
Oh, yeah.
mechanisms to do that.
Oh,
I
yeah.
suspect that's much less the case today. But the British, for obvious reasons, don't want to talk about this.
Mhm. Yeah.
They don't want to tell you that this is
Mhm.
what they do,
Mhm.
because that is what they do. I mean, they don't want to publicize the fact too much.
Mhm.
Everybody in the world who needs to know about this knows about this.
Mhm.
As I said, these firms that I'm telling you about, I mean, not only they exist and they're very respectable, they don't publicize openly what they do, but we all know who they are. I mean, we all know exactly. I know exactly. As I said, if you want me to introduce you to people like that, I can. I mean, I absolutely can. So it's not surprising. And for that very reason, anyway, the British would not want to talk too much about the British angle
Yeah.
relating to Bo Xilai and
Mhm.
what he was up to, because obviously it's very awkward and embarrassing for them. After all, how could they preach to China about human rights and the
Yeah.
rule of law and the importance of appointing British lawyers to become judges in Hong Kong and
Mhm.
for not doing bad things in Xinjiang region and all of those things, if they admitted to the fact that, as I said, Britain is the absolute world center of global corruption?
Yeah.
Just saying.
And if you read this book, The Red Roulette, actually it's very telling. The whole book is
Mm,
basically telling you how he and his wife were corrupting. They were
yeah,
working with the high level, Chinese leaders and do the corrupting things. But
yeah,
then in the end, the Xi Jinping came in and, basically wipe
Yeah.
them out, to clean them out.
Yes.
And he was talking about how Xi Jinping is a dictator, like a king
Yeah.
figure kind of thing, without admitting that what he was doing these years, the big fortune he accumulated, is some corruption. I mean, the
Yes.
book is about how he was corrupting,
I
so
must. Yeah. That is
and
very interesting. I should read this book actually.
yeah, yeah,
Sounds interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the Epstein file, though, if we come back here,
Yeah.
Trump is now under pressure, right? The latest that he is saying that Palm Bondi can release whatever credible Epstein files, whatever that means. So he's kind of like a little bit soft, a little bit. Is that too much pressure on him right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think he has badly miscalculated this, and I think it's affecting him because it's something that his base, the people who voted for him, really care about, and I think he underestimated the extent to which they care about it because he's trying to conceal what he's trying to close the book on it makes him look like exactly the sort of person they thought that he was opposed to. So for that reason, I mean, he's in serious trouble. And I've noticed that Speaker Johnson, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, is now also saying that Trump should, start disclosing things about Epstein. And I think there are things to disclose. Now, um, the obvious way to do it, I would have thought, would be to adopt the suggestion, which I think Steve Bannon is making, appoint special counsel.
Mhm.
Have somebody who's, generally honest and outside the system, at least outside this particular part of the system. Difficult to find such people in the United States, but they do exist.
Mhm.
Find that person, let him have a look, go through all the files, tell us what actually went on. And I think here there's a very important thing to say, which is if there is a list, absolutely it needs to be disclosed. And one of the reasons it's important to disclose the list is that if there's people on that list who are innocent,
Yes.
then disclosing the list and saying that they are innocent
Mhm. Yeah.
clears them.
Yeah.
Whereas holding it back simply invites rumors. And actually, given that some of these people are already well known, it's going to actually damage them, not clear them. Disclosure is the way to clear people, which is something perhaps Trump himself doesn't fully understand. Now, there are so many unanswered questions about Epstein. Um, how did he how did he become as rich as he did?
Mhm. Yeah.
How did he acquire $500 million? I mean, he's never done a job. He's never worked in a way that would satisfactorily explain how he became as rich as that.
Mhm.
Secondly, $500 million doesn't remotely amount to enough to enable the kind of lifestyle he was living. He
Mhm.
had he had the biggest mansion in Manhattan.
Yeah.
He had an enormous ranch in New Mexico. He had two islands in the Caribbean.
Mhm.
He owned an apartment building um, in the Avenue Foch in Paris.
Mhm.
He had an apartment, a house apparently in Palm Beach. He had a private jet, not just an ordinary business jet, but a former commercial transport passenger jet. I mean, it is impossible to generate enough money out of $500 million to run all of these things and to make all the donations and philanthropic things that Epstein was doing. So we need an explanation to all of this and to the fact that he had multiple passports and different identities, not a Chinese one, notice, just saying, but he had multiple passports. So, you know, you know, it may be that the number of people who are implicated is actually quite small.
Yeah.
But there are lots of unanswered questions.
Yeah.
Let's get answers to them.
Yeah. I think a part of it, they just have this habit in general. The intelligence community, they just they don't like to giving out information. I
Yeah.
think that's
Yes.
their climate. that.
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely correct. That is
Because
entirely right.
Because if you look at the file, for example, the JFK file that released, a lot of things are very benign. Like, why are you not letting people see so and so meet somewhere, in a parking lot that they were blah blah talking non-essential things, but these things are all redacted for a while. And then, like, why are you, not letting people know this? It's
Well,
very
I mean, this thing, was it 63 that happened, what, 50, 60 years ago now?
yeah,
I mean, what secrets are there from that time that
yeah,
cannot be disclosed today? I mean, really?
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, 60 years ago, it's a different world.
yeah. They're just very secretive. They like secret. They
Yeah,
don't want us to know. Whatever that is, they don't want
exactly.
us to know. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. There's more report about this meeting between Kaja Kallas and Wang Yi. You're going to
Yeah.
love it.
All right. Okay.
So even like a Brussels diplomatic circle now is floating the sentence like I think you talked about that last time, like
Yeah.
one of the most experienced and professional diplomats in the world met the most incompetent and amateur diplomats in the world. So that's
Yeah.
exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Apparently, Kayas, she prepared, or her staff prepared like 37 pages of basically China wrongdoings. That's what she prepared. Okay. And they're trying to lecture China. So she started, and there were 7 areas that she covered. So starting with China supporting Russia. Okay, they kept on saying this, and they're trying to basically put pressure on Wang Yi, saying you should stop supporting Russia. And Wang Yi brought up the Treaty of Lisbon in 2009. And Wang Yi said the whole Treaty of Lisbon, the idea is to have an independent European foreign policy. And your position, the High Representative of Union for the Foreign Affairs and the Security Policy, was established back then in 2009. And now you're telling me that I have to take sides. That's very hypocritical. Okay. And and then she brought the drones, like you were selling so much drones and drone parts, to Russia. And Wang Yi brought up the figure from the Chinese customs. The exporting of different drone parts apparently is in short supply now because so many countries are making their own drones and they're all buying parts from China. So this year, from January to June, the drone parts exporting to EU increased to 22%. And the increase to Russia is zero. Okay.
Yeah.
So if China is prioritized, because there is a short supply, is prioritized, why China's prioritized EU? Okay. And that's apparently something when Wang Yi presented that number, Kaja Kallas was a little bit in a panic mode or something. She tipped her coffee mug and the coffee spilled out and Wang Yi got lipstick stain on his cuff. So that's the drama there. And of course, she always bring up the human rights and blah blah. And Wang Yi didn't even bring all the human rights violations. She just said, well, as late as recently, French police cracked down on demonstrators, hurting. There 127 people were injured, and you, the EU, said nothing, absolutely nothing. So you're not in position to lecture me anything about human rights. So she got quiet. As you can see, the EU actually needs China's rare earth. And apparently, according to the German media, van der Leyen also would like China to support EU's Digital Service Act to counter US. So EU actually needs a lot of support from China. And yet she was actually demanding China this and this and this. And then she brought out a list saying that if you don't do this, 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 we are going to sanction 27 Chinese companies. And to that, Wang Yi brought up saying that in 2020, China and the Europe, EU, signed a comprehensive agreement on investment. And there it clearly stated trade and economic issues should not be used as a weapon, should not be politicized. So you see everything she's bringing up, and Wang Yi was well prepared and countered. So in
Yeah.
the end, she softened her tone a little bit and saying we should continue our dialogue, EU-China trade dialogue or whatever. And she also said, let's take a picture. And Wang Yi said, yes, we can take a picture, but you can delete your 27 companies sanction list first from your phone. So,
Wow. Wow. I'm not surprised it lasted 4 hours. What can I say? I mean, I obviously Kaja Kallas. We've all known about her, but this is off the scale. I mean, this is madness. I mean, it's absolute madness.
Well, after
I mean,
that, the German foreign minister actually met Wang Yi immediately and made it
yeah,
clear that Germany is against weaponizing EU-China relations. So basically,
yeah,
even the Germans are undercut her. So within EU,
mm,
not everybody agrees with her. This
no.
kind of a strategy against China, I guess, if she has a strategy. It's just bad, I think. Why is she the foreign minister?
Well, why indeed? I mean, there was an article in one of the magazines saying that she's an absolute disaster and must go. What do you say? It astonishes me. I mean, first of all, no country should ever lecture another. There are exceptions. There are some situations where you have to do that, but I mean, it should be extremely rare when that does happen. Secondly, you should certainly not lecture China. I mean, that ought to be the first, that is one of the key laws of diplomacy. And you should absolutely, under no circumstances, try to lecture Wang Yi. I mean, that is idiocy. That is complete stupidity. What was it you said? One of the most accomplished and professional diplomats in the world, and one of the most experienced ones as well. The
Mhm.
idea that you could try this kind of trick on him is just ludicrous.
What I find stunning is that she clearly wasn't preparing for this meeting well. If she was going to pressure on Wang Yi and China, she should prepare better. I mean, at least understand what this Treaty of Lisbon really means, right? When Wang Yi bring it up, it's not like a totally shock to her, to the degree that she tipped her coffee mug. It's so embarrassing.
Well, I mean, it's totally amateurish. I mean, it's stupid. I mean, first of all, I mean, a 37-page document like that. I presume she didn't share it with Wang Yi before they met.
No.
I mean, it's like a sort of out of a bad crime drama law story. I mean, where were you? The lawyer comes in with all of these papers and says, and here, we have all of this. I mean, it's just ridiculous. By the way, even that doesn't happen in real life. But I mean, if it does, I mean, you can imagine what a utterly incompetent of a lawyer you are. I mean, what is she trying to do? I mean,
Exactly.
was she thinking that she would persuade Wang Yi to change his stance, China to change its stance? Did she think that Wang Yi would say, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm going to go back to Xi Jinping, and we're going to talk about all of this, and we'll have a meeting in Beijing, and we'll see what we can do to accommodate all of this." I mean, it's crazy. I mean, diplomacy is about getting to know and understand the other person, about building up trust,
Mhm.
about working to find common ground, about isolating the areas of disagreement, about talking intelligently about the areas of disagreement. I mean, trying to put the foreign minister of China on the spot. I mean, it's idiocy. It's stupidity beyond anything I can imagine. And I mean, what they must be thinking about this in China, I can't even begin to imagine.
I think they should call for her resignation. She clearly is not qualified to do this job, right? She's fully
Mm,
prepared. I mean, what do they do with this 37 pages other than bad mouth and bashing China? There is no like a negotiation, like what
no,
should we come to agreement, right? What should we cooperate and what should we work together? There's nothing there. It just
no.
you, China, are bad on all this front, and if you don't do this, we're going to sanction you. It's just a bully. It's
Well, it's a bully that I mean. I mean, that's where it gets even more stupid because I mean, the EU is in no position to bully China anyway, as a properly briefed and professional EU High Representative wouldn't know. I mean, the idea of the EU bullying China is absurd.
Mhm.
It's, I mean, so, I mean, I mean, you shouldn't even be thinking in those terms, let alone trying to. I mean, this is absurd.
Yeah. And it's interesting that actually German's foreign minister is much more reasonable afterwards.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether the fact that she come from a small country, now finally she could come to the world stage, that become this heavyweight. She sees it that way. So make her even more emboldened or reckless in a way. I wonder.
Well, obviously, that's obviously the case. I mean, I ought to say something. I mean, the influence that the three Baltic countries have in
Mm,
European affairs has become incredibly alarming and very,
yeah,
very dangerous.
yeah.
And there's people who are joking in Germany. The German foreign policy has been basically taken over by these people, and the Germany is becoming Greater Estonia. And I mean, I've heard people say this. So, it's good to hear that the German foreign minister, who does come up from a significant country, understood that this went completely off the rails. Um, as I said, absolutely, they should insist that she step down. I mean, she's clearly wholly inadequate to her job, and she should never have been appointed to that role at all.
ASEAN countries, they have foreign ministers meetings, and it's called foreign ministers meetings and the related meetings. So there were a lot of meetings. So Marco Rubio met Lavrov, and that meeting didn't go very well, did it?
No, no. I mean, it was very interesting because I mean they met. There was the readouts were very were civil. I get the sense that there was no. I mean, nobody shouted or at the other. But again, the Americans clearly have been trying to force the Russians to back down on Ukraine, and the Russians said no.
Yeah. And then Rubio also met Wang Yi, and that for once they did have readout, but the readout on both sides are very, very simple. There is not much information there,
No, I know.
other than they
No,
were discussing Trump's visit to China, right? That seems like the
yes,
only thing. There's
yes,
nothing else they agreed upon. Okay. Now, talking about unqualified people, I do think Marco Rubio is not that qualified
he
either,
isn't.
because
He isn't.
he's sanctioned by both Russia and China, so he
Yeah.
cannot travel to Russia or
No.
to China. This
No.
is state
Exactly.
Secretary of State.
No, I
So,
know.
okay. The other thing in the ASEAN meeting is that they have signed, ASEAN countries, they have signed their own non-nuclear weapon treaty in 1997. And then they want the nuclear powers, in particular China, Russia, US, to sign it because not only they themselves don't want to produce and using, which they don't, nuclear weapons. They want
Mm.
those nuclear powers to basically make a promise. My understanding is that to make a promise that they're not coming to ASEAN countries to set up their own nuclear weapons or manufacture weapons. I think that's the purpose. They want big countries to sign as well. So China already committed and said that China is ready
Yeah.
to sign, but US is not. What is your
Well,
view?
in fact, it's clearly. I'm glad you brought this up because it's clearly directed at the United States because the only country that has any plans or has any possible plans to establish nuclear weapons bases on the territory of ASEAN states is the United States. The
Mhm.
Philippines, to be precise. The United States has maintained long-standing historic links with the Philippines, and that's what it wants to do. I mean, it's going to try to maintain a military nuclear presence in the Philippines and in ASEAN, and it's a good thing that ASEAN said no, and
Mhm.
the Philippines presumably went along with that. So we'll see whether they act on that and explain to the Americans, look, this isn't something we are prepared to tolerate anymore. We'll see.
Yeah. Now, Australia.
ASEAN is gradually positioning itself
Mhm.
closer to China.
Mhm.
They're being very careful about the way they do this. Apparently, there's been, remember we talked a few programs ago about the Vietnam
Yeah.
US trade agreement. I now understand it's been criticized in Vietnam as well, by the way, that they've looked at and they've come to realize that they made a terrible mistake, and that Vietnamese business people are very angry. And they're saying, look, we use Chinese components in many of the things that we produce. Now, what are we going to be facing? So there's criticisms of this, but gradually, ever so slowly, because they don't want to be seen publicly taking sides. And why would they want to be seen taking sides? ASEAN is gradually distancing itself from what it sees as an increasingly unpredictable and unstable US, and is starting to develop closer contacts with China. Looked at from a distance, it's clear. The Prime Minister of Singapore, I noticed, had a meeting with Xi Jiping recently, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Albanese, Australia, which is not an ASEAN country, but
No.
Australia is in a very tricky position. Anyway, so Albanese
No.
is now visiting China.
Yeah.
Trump clearly, I guess Trump people are not happy about that or something.
Yeah.
So the Trump administration has been asking Japan and Australia to clarify their positions in the event of a potential war between the United States and China. What is the Trump administration doing here?
Well, that's an excellent that is an excellent question. They're supposed to be allies of the United States, so why does it even have to ask? The only reason it can be asking that is because the United States must be thinking about an aggressive war with China.
Yeah, that's dangerous.
That's the only logical explanation.
And you see, Trump is against the war, it seems like, but he hires a bunch of hawks, people like Albert Colby.
Elbridge Colby, yeah.
Yeah, he's the Undersecretary of Defense for policy. So apparently he's the one. First of all, he's the one who pushed for this AUKUS, okay, against China, and now he's the one apparently put a lot of pressure on Australia, pressured Australia to answer this. So Trump still hired these kind of people. If he really doesn't want a war, why does he hire these kind of people? A very typical deep state, Victoria Nuland type of people, Albert
Yeah.
Colby, isn't it?
Absolutely. And of course, Marco Rubio as well, who is extremely anti-Chinese and has a long history of it. And I mean, if you're talking about, the attempt by the Trump White House to reach out to Russia in the first few weeks of the presidency, Trump's presidency. I mean, as we discussed, part of it was quite obvious that it was an attempt to try to persuade the Russians to distance themselves from China. You remember we said it wouldn't work, and the major advocate of that plan was none other than Elbridge Colby, I mean, who has, like so many other people in Washington, China on the brain. But you are completely right. I mean, Trump needs to, if he really wants to be the president of peace, and he really wants a good relationship with China, which is the only way of securing global peace, he really needs to stop listening to these people. But the trouble is, and I've said this many times, in Washington, everybody is a hardliner. It's just that some people are more focused on being hardline against Russia immediately. Others are more focused on being hardline against Iran. Still others, like Elbridge Colby, want to prioritize China. China is the country he wants to go to war with. They all want to go to war with someone.
Somebody.
And all of them ultimately are obsessed with China. The reason they say we need to defeat Russia and they need to defeat Iran is because we need to get through those first, because that supposedly will weaken and isolate China, and then we can go after them. So, I mean, until and unless we stop listening, the Americans stop, the United States gets rid of these people, throws them out of the decision-making process, then I'm afraid we're going to have constant trouble, because they're always looking for wars with someone, and ultimately China most of all. And Trump hasn't understood this.
Yeah. And recently, Jake Sullivan also had an interview with Fareed Zakaria in CNN. That interview got lots of attention in China. So what he was saying, he was critical of the tariffs war, because he said it hurts their relationship, U.S. relationship with its allies. So you see, he's very, for him, like those small group AUKUS and, also NATO, these are very important. So I feel like the style are a little bit different, but they want the same thing, right? So the
Exactly.
Democrat is more a little bit softer tone, and they like small groups and etc. And the Republicans, like Albridge Colby, also like to set up a group against this, but it's more coercive and kind of like more
Yes.
pressure, more
Yes.
confrontational kind of a
Yes.
style. So the styles are different, isn't it?
Exactly. Absolutely correct. I should quickly add, by the way, that Elbridge Colby's brilliant AUKUS idea is disintegrating because it was all based upon the idea of supply of the US and Britain supplying nuclear submarines to Australia.
Hmm.
The problem is because of the crisis in American shipbuilding, they can't build them.
Hmm.
So the plan has already been delayed by apparently about 10 years.
Hmm.
So assuming everything goes to plan, those submarines won't arrive in Australia until the mid 2040s.
Hmm.
I mean, I mean, that is the reality these people never want to confront. They're looking for a war, which, if it were ever happen and were to be limited to conventional weapons, the United States would anyway lose. The only way that this can work, not when I say work, I mean, you understand
Hmm.
what I mean when I say work, would be if the United States went nuclear.
Yeah.
So, I mean, which presumably they want to avoid. So, why even think about it if you can't do it? There are reports because Britain is also part of AUKUS. So, frankly, what role we have in it, I have no idea because our nuclear submarine fleet is basically in a harbour all the time because the ships can't get enough, can't be maintained properly. But anyway, there's talk in Britain that the whole AUKUS arrangement to send the nuclear submarines to Australia is going to be scrapped because it can't be put into practice. So, given that Elbridge Colby was the architect of a plan that has already failed, why are you paying any attention to this man? Why do you listen to him? This is what I simply don't understand.
I wonder whether the ASEAN really want to push like United States and the China and the Russia, I guess, to sign this non-nuclear weapon, zone. I wonder whether it's because Australia, what AUKUS is a little bit alarmed for them because the US want to send the nuclear submarines to Australia. That kind of like make them a little bit unsettled. I think they'll be happy to see this plan scrapped, but at the same time, they probably also want to prevent future attempts to do something inside ASEAN. I wonder whether it's related.
I wouldn't be at all surprised. I'm sure you're right. But I think fundamentally what they're saying to the Americans is, look, we don't want you with your nuclear weapons here.
Hmm.
That's the message that they're trying to convey. As I
Hmm.
said, they're doing it in a very, very polite way.
Hmm.
But ASEAN does not want to become a battleground.
Yeah.
The China is not looking to make ASEAN a battleground.
Yeah.
So ultimately, this message is directed at the United States.
Yeah, it's it's unfortunate. It is the United States is controlled by people like Albert Colby, Jake
Yes.
Sullivan. They are in and out of the government, right? When they are not in the
Yeah.
government, they are in some kind of think tank, also very influential. So
Yes.
these are the very definition of the deep state people.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they have a
Absolutely.
lot of influence.
Elbridge Colby is, I mean, he goes back very, very far. I mean, his family were one of the, I think, one of the original foundational families that set up the CIA.
Okay.
So, this is, I mean, when you say he's deep state, he is very deep state.
It's as deep as cat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Now the trade the trade war. Um, Trump threatens Brazil with 50%. Okay. And what's strange about that? He demands Brazil to release Bolsonaro.
Yeah,
Isn't
no.
that a clear violation of country sovereignty? So why is that such a big thing for him? Bolsonaro is so important for him. I don't understand.
Well, I think Bolsonaro is his personal friend. I think, again, this is all about China. I mean, everything is always about China. Always remember this. I was reading where rare earths are produced. The biggest producer of rare earths by orders of magnitude is China.
Mm-hmm.
The second country that produces the largest number of rare earths, it turns out, is Brazil.
Okay.
So I think there may be some element of this in, Donald Trump's crazy mind. Get your hands on Brazil's rare earths. Bolsonaro was his former friend and
Mm-hmm.
all of that. But think what a disastrous thing this whole thing is. And I mean, the letter he sent to President Lula of Brazil, was just shocking and disrespectful to the sovereignty of Brazil beyond anything that you can imagine. And the language of it was absolutely the language of a crude mafia boss. But what are tariffs? Are they a tax policy?
Mm-hmm.
Are they an economic policy? Or are they a form of economic coercion intended to achieve some kind of political goal? If it's the last, then they are essentially a type of sanctions. So the United States is now it's making its trade policy officially and formally an extension of its geopolitical policy. I mean, that's the only way. And its whole policy of coercion and pressure on other countries, because you're absolutely correct. I mean, the letter was ludicrous. It said, I want you to release Bolsonaro. I want you to scrap all your laws which place restrictions on American social media companies. I mean, we place restrictions on Chinese social media companies. In fact, we steal them. But we want you to actually scrap any restrictions on our social media companies. And if you don't, we will slap 50% tariffs on you, using as an excuse a trade surplus you are running with us, which doesn't even exist, because the trade between the United States and Brazil is in deficit. So I mean, the whole thing is just crazy. But that is increasingly what it's becoming. Just like you remember when they imposed the tariff policies on the reciprocal tariffs, and they were telling everybody in March and April that this is a clever plan to isolate China.
Yeah.
So it's no longer about,
Mm-hmm.
raising tax revenue for the United States, developing, protecting US domestic industry, or anything of that kind. Not that that was ever made any kind of sense anyway, but it's nothing to do with that anymore. It's all about political pressure and pressuring Brazil, which, of course, what is it now going to do? It's going to sign a trade agreement with China. And why wouldn't it? China is already its biggest trade partner.
And talking about pressure, so this Vietnam deal, I want to go back. According to Politico, so apparently there is no clear deal because Trump announced it on Truth Social. There is no joint statement from both sides, and there is no signed agreement that we can see. And so apparently the Vietnamese leaders were very angry because they had a phone call. That's true, Trump and the Vietnamese leader. And they agreed that the tariffs is 11%. And this transshipment, 40% was not even talked about, something like that. So, but he announced that all this on Truth Social. And as a result of that, the people, as you said, within Vietnam is very angry with their leader.
Yeah.
But their leader was like, I didn't agree to this.
Well, there you go. I mean, this is the president of the United States. He writes things on Truth Social, which are just complete fantasies. He claims in a conversation with donors that he telephoned Putin and Xi Jinping various times and threatened to bomb their capitals.
Yes.
A conversation which we all know never happened. I mean, what? How can you work with this man?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's another thing. Yeah, this leaked video, the audio that he supposedly he said
So,
he supposedly had those meetings. Yeah,
yeah,
and
exactly.
and
So he's now making up a whole agreement with Vietnam, which never existed.
He does that all the time, right? The latest was, of course, with the TikTok. Also turns out
Yeah,
that they claim they have a
yeah,
deal,
yeah,
and very strange deal. But later, also, ByteDance came out saying that's false. Now China
yeah,
hasn't said a word, but they
yeah,
always like to do that, like announce it as some kind of a done deal. What can
yes,
they achieve by doing something like that? Because sooner or later, people will know it's not a done
yeah.
deal. You just claim it one-sided. Why are they doing these kind of things? So
Well,
stupid.
it is stupid. It again originates from the world of New York real estate and all of that. I mean, again, I have some. I mean, I've never been involved in New York real estate. I should make that clear. But I have dealt with American companies, and they are like this. So you are in the middle of a very complicated negotiation. This is American law firms, and they will suddenly communicate to all of the parties we have an agreement in principle which has already been reached, which is XYZ. And then of course that puts pressure on you, because if you haven't agreed to this deal, you have to come out and say that, and that can actually put significant pressure on you in a negotiation. So Trump does this is art of the deal stuff, and he seems to think that it works in diplomacy just as it did in New York real estate, which of course it doesn't.
Yeah. And I also find that one thing that he also have this 30% of Mexico and the EU also.
Yeah,
We will see how EU will react. As
yeah,
I got the feeling in the end they would just have to do it. But nonetheless, I find all these things, even though Trump hasn't achieved much in this tariff war,
yeah,
but he keep on doing these things, right? He's sending more letters and blah blah. I wonder, in the end, whatever the agreement or no agreement that he will force upon other countries, but it is the US consumers, we living here, who are
yeah,
paying
yeah,
for it.
yeah.
So it's almost like other countries are now fighting on behalf of the US consumers. It almost
That's right.
feels like
Well,
that.
that's right. It's true. Actually, that's a very good way of putting it. In fact, but you're absolutely right. I mean, inflation is again rising in the United
Yes, yes.
States, and it's rising in Britain too, by the way, and it's going to rise even further because, as I said, none of this makes any kind of sense. It's completely irrational.
He,
As I said already, I mean, I don't myself agree with protectionism. I don't think it's a good policy at all. We've discussed it in the past. I think it's out of date and obsolete, and is not in tune with the realities of the modern world. What worked in the 1890s doesn't work again. But the people of the 1890s, if they saw what Trump was doing, would be tearing their hair out. They'd be saying this is absolutely not a policy of protection. It's just lunacy. It's madness. You put up tariffs up to 30% one day, take them down the next. You threaten people with aggressive letters, as he's done with the president of Brazil. You make up agreements with the president of Vietnam that was never agreed. I mean, this is just chaos, and it's inevitably going to have an effect on the world trading system. One of the things it's going to do is that it's going to mean that more and more countries are going to avoid trading with the United
Mhm,
States,
mhm.
because they don't know from one day to the next what the policy of the United States actually is.
I think what he's doing is, if we're trying to make some sense to it, is that he had this big tax cut which leave a hole, in the budget, and
Yeah,
he's trying to use the tariffs money to put in some money into that hole, instead of raising taxes for the middle class, the lower middle class, the
yeah,
people. So he's giving tax cut for the very rich, and then essentially putting a tax on the middle class and the lower class to fill in that hole
yes,
without raising, like on the surface, he's not raising taxes for us,
yeah.
but this way he is raising taxes for
Yes,
us. Is
yes.
that what?
He's
Yeah,
using he's using tariffs
yeah,
in order to avoid a income tax increase,
uh-huh,
which is
yeah.
basically what. But that's absolutely correct.
Hmm.
But and that I think is part of the strategy. I mean, he's even spoken in the past about how under William McKinley, because the
Hmm.
United States had a tariff policy, the income taxes were at zero or something of that kind.
Uh-huh,
But of course, again, this is totally out of date
yeah.
thinking. I mean, it may have made sense with the type of economy and society the United States was in the 1890s. It makes no sense today, and even then, he's not doing it properly. And as you absolutely rightly say, tariffs are a regressive tax because the burden of them is borne by poorer and middle class people.
Yeah.
Rich people benefit, by contrast, disproportionately from cuts in higher rates of income tax and in corporation tax, which is what he's doing.
Yeah. Now, Trump now resumed supply weapons to Ukraine,
Yeah,
but the way he's doing it is kind of strange, interesting. He basically asked the EU countries to buy weapons from the US to
yeah.
give to Ukraine. So he's destroying his allies. I don't know.
Yeah,
What do
yeah,
you
he is.
think?
He's destroying his allies because there isn't the money to do that. And of course, what makes it even more bizarre is that there aren't the weapons to do that. I mean, they're short of air defense missile interceptors. So he's coming up with this bizarre, overcomplicated arrangement, which isn't through the EU, by the way. It's through NATO.
NATO.
And NATO has never bought weapons. I mean, it's never been used in this fashion. And we talk about this again. We were talking about declaring agreements which don't exist. There's no document, there's no contract, there's no signed agreement anywhere. There's been negotiating the terms, agreeing a budget, thinking this out. There's nothing like that. It's just all agreed over the course of a single conversation, and presumably something along these lines will be done. As I said, it's absurdity. It's intended to fool his own base into think that he's not providing weapons to Ukraine when he is providing weapons to Ukraine. And of course, it's not going to change the dynamics in Ukraine either.
Mhm.
But it gives the appearance that he's going to do something because he doesn't want to admit the reality, which is that the Americans are out of weapons
Yeah.
and can't send them anymore to Ukraine directly without stripping themselves even further of what little they have.
And he also threatens Russia with a 100% tariffs. He never forget tariffs if there is no
Mm.
ending the war in 50 days or something. What will
Yeah,
happen? What will happen in 50 days? Because we know Russia will not flinch.
no, Russia will not flinch. So we're also threatening China because, of course, it's always China in the end,
Uh-huh.
and India as well. They're going to be subject to the 100% tariffs.
Tariffs.
We tried that. We tried that in April. It failed disastrously. But let's threaten it all over again. We bluffed them once, and our bluff was called. But we'll bluff them again, and maybe this time it won't be called. I mean, it's stupid. Again, it's and by the way, another example of using tariffs no longer as an economic policy or a tax policy, but as a mechanism, an instrument of political coercion.
Yeah.
As I said, it is all over the place. It is a complete mess. I was reading the Chinese Foreign Ministry website, and I saw that is he named Li Qian, the
Li Qiang,
Chinese, the foreign ministry spokesman. He's already commented about this, and he said that China will not accept unilateral sanctions of any kind, and tariff wars only result in everybody losing and nobody winning, which is partly true because if there is a tariff war, China will win.
Yeah. Um, the Middle East. So Israel is now bombing Damascus and I guess some other things. So Turkey seems not very happy about that. Is there some danger it's going to escalate in Syria? The situation is worsening.
There is a very real danger because the government in Syria really isn't in control of Syria.
Yeah.
And this is the major underlying problem. I mean, getting rid of Assad looked all very easy and,
Hmm. Hmm.
supposed to solve the problems. It's just created a whole new set of problems.
Yes,
And of course, it's now creating a crisis between Israel and Turkey. My guess is that Israel and Turkey do not want to fight each other. Because
okay.
Syria, I mean, the government in Syria
Hmm.
is, I mean, it's a fiction.
Yeah.
It's not really a government at all. So, I mean, it's Turkey versus Israel in this. So I think that some kind of deal or arrangement in private will be done.
Hmm.
But it's all very, very precarious. And probably the situation is going to gradually get worse as the weeks and months drag on.
And this disarmament of the Kurdish separatists, do you think it's real or is symbolic?
It's symbolic. There is absolutely no way that people in that part
Hmm.
of the world are going to give up their weapons.
Yeah. In conclusion, so there's some Chinese media people, they're very good, did some calculation and saying actually we're living in a very dangerous world right now because from 2022, 59 countries now are in some kind of a conflict, domestic or foreign. And in 2024, 150,000 deaths related to different conflicts, which is the highest after World War II. So what is your comment on that? I didn't do those kind of calculation, but somebody did. I find that's interesting. I want to hear your comment.
The Chinese are very good at this kind of thing, and I mean, yeah, of course, I'm limited to reading what you might call the official Chinese
Hmm.
media. The Global Times, the English international edition of the People's Daily Xinhua.
Hmm.
But I mean, even there, I mean, the commentary is a very, very high standard. I'm sure that on social media it's even higher, to be honest.
Hmm.
But that is absolutely correct. And there is one proximate cause. There is a small group of countries at the center of the international system, the United States, Europe, Israel, who
Hmm.
simply will not adjust to changing realities in the world. They've
Hmm.
been very, very accustomed to the fact that they are the dominant powers. And what they've gradually sensing is that that power is slipping, and that's making them more aggressive. And they are the ultimate cause of all of these wars.
Hmm.
And it is dangerous because war is an inherently incredibly dangerous thing, especially when it is done in this way without any real plan, because there is no plan that can reverse the ultimate trends,
Hmm.
which are for a decline in Western hegemony. I mean, Putin actually put it very well in his recent
Hmm.
speech. He said it's like trying to stop the sun rising.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, by the way, the 152,000 deaths, I think they did say that they don't calculate what is going on in Ukraine because it's very hard to get exact
Yeah,
numbers there.
yeah,
And also Gaza numbers, they think
yeah,
it's wildly underestimated the number there, the
yeah,
death there. So
yeah.
anyway, so even 150,000 is a very high number for 2024
Yes,
compared to other years in after World War II. So
yeah.
yeah, okay. Well,
China is an oasis of calm.
yeah,
It
yeah.
really is. I don't know whether people in China know that. I mean, look, even India and Pakistan have had a
Yes,
clash.
yeah, 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 there's tension there. And the latest also Thailand and Cambodia also have some
Yeah,
conflict there, so
absolutely.
yeah. So we will see.
Yeah,
A lot of things can happen just within a week. So let's talk next
absolutely.
Wednesday.
Indeed. So have a wonderful week, Sophia. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.